Soilwise, managing soils and fertilisers. Hi, welcome to Soilwise, a DVD for farmers who want to know about their soils and how to use their fertilisers well. Soils are great. They are the backbone of all life on Earth. So let's get to know them so that we can look after them. If we look after the soil, it will look after us and continue to produce healthy crops. Soils are life. Let's look after them.
This DVD is for farmers who want to know about the soil on their farm and how to use fertilisers well. It shows how to work out what type of soil you have and how to look after the soil so that it can grow healthy crops. It shows step by step how to do things like test your soil for nutrients, test soil saltiness, that's EC, and soil pH. It also looks at using fertilisers, how much to use and when to use it. Soils are everywhere. They support the growth of plants that support life on Earth. Soils provide most of the things a plant needs to grow: water, food, and air for the roots. Soils form the basis of ecosystems everywhere. Healthy soils provide for healthy crops, gardens, and natural bushland. All the animals and ecosystems in the world rely on the plants growing in soil. A healthy soil has high organic matter, high biological activity, high moisture storage capacity, a balance of available nutrients, light structure, and good internal drainage. It takes nature hundreds of years to produce 1 centimetre of soil, and in a very short time it can be gone. Poor farming practices can damage soils and they can be lost. By building healthy soil, you will maintain a healthy crop. Soil is made up of solid, liquid and gas components. The solid parts come from weathered rock. Over many millions of years, the effects of wind, rain, primitive plants, heat, frost and thawing break down the rock's surface and form small fragments of rock. The tiny particles of rock formed by weathering had to be transformed chemically too. This is done by soil microorganisms. These microorganisms feed on the minerals in the rock and release chemicals that break down the rock particles. Healthy soil also contains many living organisms. They play a very important role in soil, and there are many millions in just 1 gram of soil. So many, in fact, that soil can be considered to be living. Bacteria, fungi, protozoa and algae make up the major part of the living organisms in the soil. Bacteria are responsible for the cycling of compounds such as nitrogen, sulphur and phosphorus. Many bacteria surround the root in a film of water and assist the plant in taking up nutrients. This root hair is surrounded by beneficial bacteria. Some bacteria are responsible for providing nitrogen to plants such as legumes. They fix nitrogen from the air and make it available to the plant. Fungi make up 70% of the living organisms in soil. They can be free-living, parasitic on plants, and in many cases are beneficial. They decompose plant and animal parts and recycle the molecules back into the soil. Mycorrhizal fungi obtain nutrients from the plant roots and in turn aid the plant in the uptake of nutrients such as phosphorus and zinc. They form a vital link between the soil and the plant root. There are also larger organisms in healthy soil. There may be many different kinds of small and large insects: worms, spiders, ants, millipedes and slaters. They break up the larger parts of plants and animals so that the fungi and bacteria can break them down quickly. When these organisms move through the soil, they create holes, pockets and channels. This improves the structure of the soil and allows water to move into and through the soil. Undisturbed soils have naturally formed layers. This is called a soil profile. These layers are often different colours because they have different minerals and characteristics. The layers change as you look down the profile. Dark soils at the top show that there is organic matter present. This is the topsoil. Lighter soils at the bottom show that minerals have leached out of the soil. This is the subsoil. This soil is virtually useless for growing plants, although some roots will bore into it for stability and in search of water. Often there is more clay in the lower layers as the fine particles are washed down the profile. We are more concerned about the topsoil. This is the layer in which we grow crops. Soil profiles in different places will differ. Some are very shallow, others are deeper. Bedrock and the climate determine what type of soil is formed and how deep it is. The liquid part in the soil is usually water and contains dissolved salts, some of which are plant nutrients. Plants need an enormous amount of water. Water is essential for plant growth, fruiting and flowering. Water is essential to keep the plant stiff so that leaves face the sun and the normal growing processes can occur. Water also dissolves the nutrients in the soil so they can be absorbed by the roots of the plant. Water is needed for germination and growth, but over-wet soils cause disease. Ideally, water should coat the soil particles, dissolve the soil nutrients, and at the same time, leave enough room for air in the pore spaces. The gas component is air. Good soil is about 1/4 air. Air provides the oxygen for the roots and is essential for the microscopic life in the soil to break down organic matter and release nutrients. Soil particles are grouped into 5 main size ranges. From largest to smallest, they are gravel, coarse sand, fine sand, silt, and clay. To understand the relative size difference of the soil particles, think of a grain of sand as a basketball, a particle of silt as a marble, and a particle of clay as a pinpoint. A healthy soil contains a mixture of these different sized particles.
To see what is in your soil, follow these simple steps. Take a jar, half fill it with your soil that you're interested in. Top it up with water. Put a tight-fitting lid on. And shake it very thoroughly. You then leave it for several hours for the soil to settle out. Sand particles are the heaviest, so they settle out fastest. Then silt and then clay particles. The sort of result you get is shown here. You can see a fairly thick layer of sand particles, a much thinner layer of silt particles, and a very thin layer of clay particles. You also still have quite a lot of clay particles still in suspension in the water, and a layer of organic matter floating on the water.
The mix of different sized solid particles determines the type of soil. These different soils have different amounts of fine and coarse particles. This means they have different characteristics The sandier soils hold more air than water, and the clayer soils hold more water than air. If you have areas of different soils on your farm, they will behave differently. You may have to water one area more and another less. Another area might hold more nutrients and the crops grow better there. If you can find out what the different soils on the farm are, you can more easily manage the crop production in them. If you have a choice of soils, and most of us don't, sandy loam is about the best for vegetable farming. Loams typically have soil particles of different sizes. They feel gritty because of the sand, and yet hold together well. Sandy textured soils are loose, with good aeration and good internal drainage. They are often called light soils because they are easy to cultivate. Sandy soil needs to have fertiliser added often because of leaching, which is washing away of the nutrients by water. Sandy soils also absorb and hold heat quite well, so they quickly warm up in spring, allowing rapid early growth. Clay textured soils are often lumpy and can be difficult to work, so are referred to as heavy. They hold water and nutrients well, but internal drainage can be poor, leading to waterlogging. It can form a crust after heavy rain, and when it dries out, it is more likely to form hard lumps, which makes the soil very difficult to work. The colour of soil can also vary from place to place. The colour can also change the deeper you go in the soil profile. The texture of a soil is a description of the amounts and sizes of the mineral particles in the soil. Leaving out the large stones and rocks, the mineral part of the soil consists of sand, silt and clay. The relative amounts of these gives the soil its texture. The texture is also the name we use to describe the soil. Understanding what type of soil you have helps you grow your crops better. Soils with different texture have different physical properties. Sandy soils have less water holding capacity than clay soils. Clay soils have higher nutrient holding capacity. A loam soil has the best properties of all: adequate water holding capacity and adequate nutrient holding capacity. You can easily work out the texture of the soil on your farm. Follow these simple steps.
We need to take a small handful of soil. This soil should be from the root zone of the plants. We need to remove organic material and rocks for the soil texture test to be effective. We then add some water to our soil sample, just enough to wet it up so that it is workable. And you can see that I'm working the soil now with my hands. And as I'm working the soil, I feel how smooth it is, how gritty it is. And that will give me an indication of the amount of clay or silt that's in the soil. So we're now ready to do the soil texture test, and that involves pushing the soil between your thumb and forefinger to form a ribbon, just as I'm doing now. I'm just pushing it forward, and we keep pushing the soil forward until it falls. And here we have a ribbon length. Using a ruler, we can measure the length of this ribbon, and in this case, it's measuring at about 35 millimetres. We can use our chart, our soil texture chart, to determine the texture of the soil, knowing how it feels, how it sounded, and the length of the ribbon. In this case, the length of the ribbon was about 35 millimetres. It felt very smooth, not very gritty at all. If we look up the chart, this most approximates a clay loam soil. The chart tells us that the clay loam soil has a ribbon length between 40 and 50 millimetres. It's very sticky, as this soil is, and quite smooth.
Crops need nutrients in the form of fertiliser salts to grow well, but when there are too many salts in the soil, crops stop growing well and show signs of toxicities to one or many salts. If crops are dying or growing slowly, or if the leaves are brown along the edges, the soil could contain too much salt. These are all symptoms of salt toxicity. The salts are most likely from the fertiliser you use. When you apply more fertiliser than the plants need, the fertiliser salts can build up in the soil. When the amount of salts gets too high, it stops plants growing or stops seeds germinating. Soil saltiness is called EC, which stands for electrical conductivity. The higher the EC, the more salts in the soil. Each crop has a level above which the yield from that crop starts to fall.
You can easily measure the electrical conductivity of your soil on your farm. You need to collect soil from the top 20 centimetres from your production area. It's important to collect samples from about 10 different locations and to mix them together in a bucket. Mix them thoroughly so that you've got a good total sample. You then need to get a jar that you can have a tight-fitting lid for. You'll draw a line 3 centimetres from the bottom and another line 4 centimetres from the bottom. You fill to the bottom line with distilled water and then carefully add soil until the water level gets to the top line. You put on the lid and then you shake it for 10 minutes. You then need to leave the jar somewhere where it won't be disturbed and allow the soil to settle to the bottom and the water to become relatively clear at the top. This can take up to an hour for clay soils, but can be as short as 10 minutes for sandy soils. This is the sort of result you're looking for, with the soil at the bottom, water at the top. You carefully put the EC meter in, being careful not to disturb the soil in the bottom of the jar, and read off the figure. In this case, it's 0.9 decisiemens per metre. You can then compare that with a table of the salt tolerance of different crops, and we can see that 0.9 is lower than any of the salt sensitivities for a wide range of crops.
Now you can tell what the EC is anywhere on your farm, but what does it mean? If your EC is above the level suggested for the crop, you need to look at your fertiliser use and reduce it. If you are using dam water, perhaps the water in your dam has a high EC too. Test it as well. Reduce the chance of over-fertilising by calculating how much to use rather than guessing, measuring the amount of fertiliser you put on. Incorporate compost into soil. This helps bind up nutrients. If you use chicken manure, use about half the rate of other fertilisers. Use town water if available to water crops or refill the dam. The salts in the soil remain unless they are taken up by the plant or they are leached away in drainage water. They do not evaporate or fade away. When they dissolve into the soil water, they are leached out in the drainage, but then they go into your dam or the creek, which is not good for the environment. To prevent this, you need to stop fertilising routinely and only fertilise when your soil testing shows you need to. Soil structure describes the way the soil particles are held together and the size and shape of the gaps. The gaps are the pore spaces between them. Good structure allows the soil to hold just the right balance of air and water and makes it easy for plant roots to move through the soil. In a healthy soil with good structure, The soil particles are held together in such a way that there is a mixture of large pore spaces for water and small pore spaces for air. The roots grow easily between the small lumps and can find water easily with plenty of air around also. Poor soil structure means that either the soil particles are pushed so close together that there is no room for air or water between them, or the particles are so broken up they do not hold together at all and there are no pore spaces to hold water or air. In soil with good structure, the mineral particles and organic matter in the soil are held together to form clods or PEDs. You can think of PEDs as the building blocks of the soil. The cracks, pores and spaces between the PEDs allow water and air to enter the soil. These pore spaces are also important for the soil organisms because they provide them with habitat and air to breathe. Soil structure in soils on farms is constantly changing due to cultivation, the amount of water, organic matter and biological activity in the soil. The soil can start with a fairly good structure, but after frequent cultivation and no additions of organic matter, the soil structure can break down. Poor soil structure can make farming difficult. It affects the ability of water to move through a soil. If water cannot drain quickly away, the water may push out the air and stop plant roots carrying out their function. Waterlogged soils can stunt and kill plants and create places for disease to thrive. A thick or heavy soil that is cloddy or chunky will not provide the right balance of air and water. The large pore spaces will be filled with water when the soil is wet and waterlog the plant, or when it is dry they will be filled with air and the roots will dry out and the crop will fail. Sandy soils have little or no structure. The small pore spaces cannot hold enough water for the plants. The roots can grow easily in them, but only if watered regularly. Look closely at the smallest lump of soil you can see. Provided your soil has a range of different sized and shaped lumps, it has good structure. The different sizes and shapes provide different sized pore spaces for water and air. Match your soil to these pictures of soil structure. Okay, so the structure of your soil wasn't very good. How did it get that way? There are a number of things farmers can do that damages the soil structure. Some practices cause compaction, such as using a rotary hoe. Some practices reduce microbial activity, which is the glue that holds soils together. Practices such as spraying, letting the soil dry out too much, and covering with plastic. When you harvest the crop, you take away from the soil the organic matter that feeds the microbes and holds the soil together. Cultivating the soil when it is too dry shatters the soil. Cultivating the soil when it is too wet compacts the soil. But these things are easy to fix. It just takes time. Some of the things you should stop doing include using a rotary hoe all the time, cultivating when the soil is wet. If your soil looks like this, you should not cultivate either. The soil is too dry and the structure will be shattered if you cultivate. Some things you should start doing include compost or green waste into the soil at the start of every crop. Reduce the number of times you cultivate the land. Think about planting straight into the bed after just a light raking. Cultivation, loosening up and working the soil with a rake, hoe, plough or rotary hoe is an important production measure. It mixes organic matter, weeds or cover crops into the soil. It can temporarily improve the structure of heavy clays by providing aeration. But there are problems involved in cultivating. Working a soil when it is too wet causes it to form thick lumps, particularly clay soil, and can cause severe compaction. This will cause it to form puddles and when it dries out, to become very hard. Working a soil when it is too dry is also a problem. The activity of lifting and turning the soil can shatter it into very fine particles. The structure is lost and the soil becomes prone to erosion and can blow away or run off in water. It is also possible to cultivate too often. The soil organisms need time to do their work undisturbed. Cultivating too often breaks up the cycles of decomposition and makes the process take longer. Cultivating can open up the soil too much, leaving it prone to drying out and killing the soil organisms that we rely on for good structure. If the soil surface stays wet for a while after each irrigation, if there is puddling in the surface, if there is uneven crop growth, then it is likely that there is some soil compaction under the surface. Compaction is caused mostly by a heavy weight pushing down on the soil, pushing soil particles together and forcing out the air. It becomes difficult for water, air and plant roots to penetrate the soil. Common causes of compaction is irregular use of a rotary hoe, driving heavy machinery on the bed, walking on the bed. You can easily test for soil compaction. Using a long thin probe, push it straight down into the soil. You will immediately feel when it becomes difficult to push. Hold on to the point where the probe meets the soil's surface and gently draw the probe out. The length of the probe in the soil shows the depth of the compacted layer. To reduce compaction, avoid using machinery on wet soils. Try to have the same wheel width on all machinery and form the beds to fit between the wheels. Reduce the use of cultivation equipment like rotary hoes that compact the soil. Occasionally, use a deep ripper to break up the compacted layer. Most people understand that nitrogen, phosphorus and potassium, commonly called NPK, are the most important nutrients a plant needs for life and growth. But there are really 13 elements in total that a plant needs and gets from the soil. The other important major nutrients are sulfur, magnesium and calcium. The rest are minor nutrients, often called trace elements. They include iron, zinc, boron, sodium, manganese, copper, molybdenum, chlorine and cobalt. The trace elements are just as important to healthy plant growth as the major ones, but are not needed in large quantities. There is a big difference in the amounts of the major nutrients needed compared with the minor nutrients. This means for a crop growing on 1 hectare, you might need to apply 250 kilograms of superphosphate each year to supply enough P and only 50 grams of molybdenum once every 5 years. It is easy to oversupply the minor elements and to undersupply the major ones. But without any one single nutrient, the crop will not thrive. Every element is essential for growth, but is needed in different amounts. Nitrogen is the most important nutrient because plants contain so much of it. It gives them their dark green colour and is essential for leaf and stem growth. A plant that does not get enough nitrogen will look sickly and yellow. The problem with nitrogen is that it escapes easily from the soil as a gas or through leaching. It needs to be regularly replenished. Phosphorus stimulates growth, flowering and root development. Cell division is a part of growth and would not occur without phosphorus. Plants without phosphorus grow slowly. They look droopy and have poor root systems. But phosphorus tends to stick to soil particles and can be lost through erosion. If it enters creeks and waterways, it will cause pollution and algae will grow. Potassium is necessary for the making of chlorophyll. It strengthens stems and increases disease resistance and promotes flowering and fruiting. Plants without enough potassium look stunted. Potassium, like nitrogen, is easily leached from the soil. Sulphur is also important. All proteins in plants and animals contain sulphur. Without proteins, a plant cannot function at all and dies. Calcium is an important element in cells. A lack of calcium prevents cells developing properly and affects the plant's ability to take up nutrients from the soil. Magnesium is an element contained in the green parts of the plant. If a plant does not have enough magnesium, it cannot make enough green leaf material, and that reduces the amount of photosynthesis that can take place. This reduces the growth of the plant. As crops are grown and harvested, nutrients are continually being removed from the soil. Nutrients are also lost by leaching and soil erosion. Some nutrients can also be tied up in the soil and not be available to the plants at all. For these reasons, we need to apply fertilisers. There are an enormous number of fertilisers available. Some are single nutrient fertilisers and others are blends. There are different fertilisers for different crops and different tasks. Some replace all the necessary elements and others just supply a few or one. Some fertilisers are only minor element fertilisers. All brands and types of fertilisers have labels which show what they contain. If we look at nitrogen first, nitrogen products come as single fertilisers in the form of ammonium nitrate. Mixed fertilisers, such as sulphate of ammonia, which is about 21% N and 24% S, or as a blended fertiliser, either solid or liquid. Ammonium nitrate is also cheap and easily spread. It is commonly sold as nitram, containing 34% nitrogen. There are now restrictions on the use and storage of ammonium nitrate. You must have a licence issued by WorkCover. It is also very soluble, which makes it useful for hydroponic production systems and quickly greening up crops. Potassium nitrate is a good alternative to ammonium nitrate. It is also soluble, cheap and easy to use. Containing 13% nitrogen and 38% potassium, it is also a useful form of potassium. Ammonium sulphate is another form of nitrogen. It is cheap, easily spread, but contains sulphur, which acidifies the soil. This may be a problem if you already have soils that are acidic. However, it is also a useful source of sulphur. Urea is another form of nitrogen. It contains 46% nitrogen. It is easily spread but should be watered into the soil. If left on the surface, the nitrogen turns into ammonia gas and escapes. Phosphorus is often supplied as superphosphate, and the amount of phosphorus in it will be around 9%. It will also contain around 11% sulphur. Potassium can be supplied as sulphate of potash, which contains 41% of K, or as potassium nitrate, which will contain 38% potassium and 13% nitrate. You could work out exactly how much of each of these single fertilisers your crop needs. But this is complicated, so the fertiliser companies have done this for you by producing blended fertilisers. Some crop needs are different from others. For example, vegetable crops have different needs to those of roses. So be sure to select a blended fertiliser to suit your crop. Your seed, seedling or chemical supplier can help you with this. Your local Department of Primary Industries also has assistance available. Be aware that these blended fertilisers are expensive. You need to be careful to use the correct amount as described on the label or as advised by an expert. Organic fertilisers, such as animal manures, crop wastes, seaweed products, sewage sludge, and blood and bone products are also useful as fertilisers and soil conditioners. There is no best fertiliser and no one fertiliser suits all. You have to decide what type of fertiliser you need and apply the amount you need. When crops are grown, harvested and removed from the farm, nutrients are lost from the soil. The plant material that makes up the crop has come from the nutrients in the soil, and harvesting the crop takes it away. Nutrients are also lost through leaching into drainage and through erosion. This means that over time the soil contains less and less nutrients, and each nutrient is lost at different rates. Knowing your crop will help you decide when to fertilise, but most crops use very little fertiliser in the early stage and much more as the crop matures. The first thing you need to do when working out how much fertiliser to use is to find out how much is there already. If you or someone else has been farming the land before, it is very likely that there is a considerable amount of fertiliser already in the soil. You will need to test the soil to see the availability of nutrients. A soil test can be done by your local product supplier. You can also test the soil yourself if you purchase the required tools. The following is a simple test to roughly see how much nitrogen is in the soil. This is not a very accurate test, it gives an indication only of how much nitrogen there is available to the plant. A soil test done by a soil laboratory is far more accurate. First, you will need to buy nitrate test strips. Commonly used nitrate test strip is made by a company called Merck. You can get the strips by calling Merck on 1800 335 571 and ask to order nitrate test strips 10020.
You need to collect a soil sample from your production area. You need to collect a sample from the top 20 centimetres, and you need to collect small samples from at least 10 locations and mix those thoroughly together in a bucket. Next, you need a jar with a tight-fitting lid, and you'll draw a line 3 centimetres from the bottom of the jar and a second line 4 centimetres from the bottom of the jar. You fill the jar to the bottom line with distilled water and then carefully add soil until the water level reaches the top mark. You then put on the lid and shake for 10 minutes. You need to put the jar somewhere where it won't be disturbed to allow the soil to settle to the bottom and the water above it to become relatively clear. This can take up to an hour for a clay soil, but can be as short as 10 minutes for a sandy soil. This is the sort of result you should get. At this point, you can use a nitrate test strip to measure the nitrogen level in the soil. You simply dip the test strip into the water at the top, being careful not to put it into the soil at the bottom of the jar. Leave it in for a few seconds, shake it dry, and wait 1 minute for the colour to develop on the test pads. Then you can compare the colour development on the test strip with the colour chart on the side of the jar. This shows that the soil has between 100 and 250 milligrams per litre of nitrate nitrogen. From the table in the manual, you can see that a result of less than 100 milligrams per litre indicates that you need to use a moderate rate of fertiliser. A result between 100 and 250 milligrams per litre means that you only need to use a low rate of fertiliser. A result between 250 and 500 milligrams per litre indicates that you don't need to use any fertiliser. And a result of greater than 500 milligrams per litre indicates that there's already too much fertiliser in the soil and it could be high enough to burn your crop.
The following is an example of how to determine how much fertiliser is needed by the crop. 1,000 tomato plants will use 6 kilograms of nitrogen. Normally, there are 16,000 tomato plants per hectare. This means that tomatoes need or use 100 kilograms of nitrogen per hectare. This nitrogen needs to be replaced by fertilisers before a new crop can be grown. 300 kilograms of ammonium nitrate per hectare would provide this amount, or 710 kilograms of calcium nitrate, or 770 kilograms of potassium nitrate, or 220 kilograms of urea, or 830 kilograms of nitrophosphate blue special. Which fertiliser you use to supply the nitrogen will depend on cost, whether the soil needs the other nutrients, and the equipment you have to spread it. This table shows the amount of nitrogen per hectare a crop needs. Select your crop. Remember that 300 kilograms of ammonium nitrate provides 100 kilograms of nitrogen per hectare. 710 kilograms of calcium nitrate provides 100 kilograms of nitrogen per hectare, whilst 770 kilograms of potassium nitrate provides 100 kilograms of nitrogen per hectare. 220 kilograms of urea provides 100 kilograms of nitrogen per hectare. 830 kilograms of nitrophosphate blue special provides 100 kilograms of nitrogen per hectare. If you are spreading dry or pelleted fertilisers, you can measure how much fertiliser has landed in a square metre and compare it to the recommended rate. Here's one way of doing it. Make up a shallow flat box, like a tray, 1 metre square, with a 5 centimetre or so edge around it. When you are ready to spread the fertiliser, place the tray on the growing bed. Spread the fertiliser as you would normally. When you have finished this bed, stop and pick up the tray and weigh the fertiliser in the tray. You can weigh the fertiliser using everyday kitchen scales. Compare this amount with the recommended rate. If the recommended rate is in kilograms per hectare, divide this rate by 10. The end result will give the rate in grams per square metre. If you have applied the fertiliser at the correct rate, the amount you weighed would equal the recommended rate. Organic fertilisers come entirely from animal or vegetable sources. Examples are poultry manure, cow or sheep or horse manure, blood and bone, seaweed, fish meal, sewage sludge, hoof and horn meal. Greatest difference between organic and artificial fertilisers is that in organic fertilisers, the nutrients are available slowly and they add valuable organic matter to the soil. They stimulate soil organism activity, which over time improves the soil. The composition of organic fertilisers varies widely. but generally they have a lower NPK than artificial fertilisers and often provide a wide range of nutrients and other chemicals that assist plant growth and health. Organic fertilisers can be used along with artificial fertilisers to provide organic matter and contribute to the fertiliser needs of the crop. You can use poultry manure to improve soil structure and supply the nitrogen and other nutrients. The recommended rate is 8 cubic metres per hectare, or 0.5 cubic metres per 1,000 plants. And that gives you about 80 kilograms of nitrogen per hectare, and 55 kilograms of phosphorus per hectare, and 25 kilograms of potassium per hectare. This is about half what the crop needs. If you were to apply more, there is a high risk that over time, the amount of phosphorus and potassium would become too high for healthy growth. If the poultry manure supplies half of the nutrients required, you need to reduce the amount of other fertilisers you use. So use half the recommended rate on the fertiliser bag. Many growers often use much more than this rate and also use other fertilisers. Apart from wasting money, they run the risk of crop losses due to salinity in the soil or nutrient toxicities occurring in the crop. It is not a case of the more, the better. A plant can grow only as fast as it can. Putting on more fertiliser will not make the plant grow faster or better. Very often it does the opposite and the crops die. Plants can only take up the nutrients as they need them. Putting more in the soil than the plant can use is a waste. It also harms the environment. Unused fertiliser is washed into dams and waterways, attached to soil particles or in drainage water. It causes algal blooms, which can poison animals and humans. All soils contain at least some nutrients, so minimising runoff and soil erosion are the best ways to reduce loss of nutrients and pollution of dams and waterways. If you apply fertilisers sensibly, using rates recommended after soil or tissue testing, timing the application to suit the plant needs, the plants will use a high proportion of the nutrients from the fertiliser. Doing this will result in little of the nutrients being lost through runoff, erosion or leaching, and there will be minimal harm to the environment. You will have a healthy crop with reduced input costs. Soil pH shows how acid or alkaline your soil is. It is important for you to know what the pH is because it influences the nutrients available for the plant to take up. If the soil is too acid, below 5, the crops can suffer from potassium, sulphur, calcium, magnesium, or molybdenum deficiencies. If the soil is too alkaline, above 7, the crops can suffer from boron, manganese, zinc, iron, or copper deficiencies. You can't tell your soil pH just by looking at it. It has to be tested. Soil pH varies throughout the country, the state, and can vary throughout your farm. It is important to know the pH of the soil of all the areas on your farm so that you can understand how different areas respond to fertilisers and grow crops. You can easily test the soil pH of your soil by following these easy steps.
You can purchase a pH test kit from your local hardware store or garden centre. Inside the kit you will find a liquid indicator and a powder indicator, a colour comparison chart and a small clean board to do the test on. Take a small amount of soil test. Add 2 to 3 drops of the liquid indicator onto the soil. Mix the indicator in the soil thoroughly, then apply a dusting of the powder indicator and you will notice change in colour almost immediately. With a colour comparison chart, try and match the colour of the indicator with the chart. For this particular soil, the pH is about 6.5. Now you can work out what the pH is anywhere on your farm. If you test the pH of the soil along the fence line, you can see what the pH is in the soil where no cropping occurs.
But what does it mean? A pH of more than 7 means that the soil is too alkaline for most of the nutrients to be available for the crop to absorb. You need to lower the pH. pH of less than 5 means that the soil is too acid for most of the nutrients to be available for the crop. You need to raise the pH. Some soils are naturally acidic, and some of your farming practices increase acidity. For instance, using fertilisers like ammonium sulphate and monoammonium phosphate, growing legume crops all the time, and harvesting and removing crops all act to increase the acidity. Raising or lowering the pH of the soil takes some time. It is not instant. It has usually taken a long time to become high or low, so it will take some time to get back to neutral. Lime is often used to adjust the pH of soil. pH test for adding lime to the soil so that you know how much to use. Too much lime will burn plants and exhaust the soil. Not enough will have little effect on pH. Lime comes in different forms. You can use agricultural lime, known as calcium carbonate, or dolomite, which is known as calcium and magnesium carbonate. Choose the rate that matches your soil type. These rates, expressed in grams per square metre, will raise the pH of the top 10 centimetres of soil by 1 pH unit. Mix this amount into the soil before planting the crop. The soil pH will only change slowly. If your soil is very alkaline, above 7.5, it is very costly to lower it. For soils that are neutral or slightly alkaline, 7.5 or below, add sulphur at 25 grams per square metres for sandy soils, at 50 grams per square metre for loams, and 100 grams per square metre for clay soils. This application should reduce soil pH to between 6 and 6.5. Soil erosion is a loss of soil. Generally, this is topsoil. It is a natural process that has been occurring at different rates across the planet for millions of years. Sedimentary rocks showing many layers of deposited sediments are evidence of this. Sediments accumulate, and under pressure the layers were cemented together to form rock. These rocks in time erode and new soil is formed. It is a continual process. However, the rate of erosion in present times is many times greater than in previous years. On cultivated land, it can be as much as 100 millimetres a year. Rainfall and wind collect soil and move it a great distance. In farming areas, erosion is usually a gradual process. Removing the vegetation cover leaves the soil bare. Vegetation cover particularly close to the ground protects the soil from wind and slows the spread of water flow. Grasses have particularly dense root systems and are excellent for holding soil together. Leaving the soil bare between crops is a normal practice of most farmers. This leaves the soil at great risk of soil erosion. Wind and water can remove the topsoil, the sediment can move in the runoff and be deposited in dams and creeks. Even when crops are growing, there is frequently bare soil between the plants and rows. Weeding is carried out because it reduces competition for water and nutrients, and the weeds provide a habitat for pests and disease and make harvesting easier and cleaner. But it also increases the amount of erosion. Compaction of the soil surface is another important factor that can lead to increased water erosion. Compacted soil prevents water soaking in and increases overland flow. Water flow concentrates in machinery tracks and erosion rates can be very high. There are a number of devices that can be built to conserve soil. These include contour banks, stormwater drains, grassed waterways, pasture furrows. All of these are designed to slow water runoff and therefore reduce soil loss. These can be expensive and difficult to construct on a small farm. There are also farming practices that conserve soil. These include crop choice, minimum or reduced tillage, crop rotations, retaining crop waste, strip cropping, and incorporating organic matter. Compost. Compost is partly decomposed organic matter. It occurs naturally on forest floors where leaf matter breaks down and the nutrients are released into the soil. Compost is a useful source of organic matter. When added to soil, it increases biological activity and improves soil structure, which improves both drainage and water retention. You can make your own compost out of crop waste and other plant material. This will be more practical for some farmers than others. It requires enough room for a compost heap, enough time to turn the heap, the right equipment to turn the heap, and patience, because it is a fairly slow process. Useful materials for a compost heap are materials high in carbon, crop waste, leaves and stems, straw, twiggy prunings, bark and pine needles, sawdust, paper and wood ash. Some materials that are high in nitrogen include vegetable and fruit waste from the kitchen or the field, grass clippings, flowers, fresh weeds, tea leaves, manures, blood and bone, seaweed. You need the right amount of carbon and nitrogen, otherwise the microbes cannot break down the materials. The ideal mix is 25 parts of carbon-rich material to 1 part of nitrogen-rich material by weight. There is no one way to compost. There are many variations in the material and equipment available, so you have to experiment a little with your own composting. But here are some basic steps. Set aside an area and build some walls to contain the heap. 2.5 metres by 1 metre is a good size. Collect the organic material you will use. Place these in layers, mixing the nitrogen-rich materials with the carbon-rich ones. When all the material is in place, water it so that it is damp but not wet. Have a removable cover to protect the heap from excessive rain and drying out. Turn the heap every 2 weeks. Do not add any more material to this heap. Create a new heap for new material. The heap should be not too wet and not too dry. It should be warm. If you put your hand in the heap, it should feel hot, but not more than 60 degrees is recommended. The heap should not be slimy, smelly or infested with animals. If it is, you need to get it hotter by adding lawn clippings and turning the heap more frequently. Your compost should be ready in about 6 to 8 weeks. You can tell when compost is ready for use when the heap has cooled down completely and the material no longer looks like the material that went in. It is generally dark and crumbly. There are 2 main ways to use compost. You can turn it into the soil or use it as a mulch on the surface. Vegetable farmers mostly turn it into the soil when preparing the bed for a crop. You can apply compost at any time of the year. You get the best results when more than 25% of the topsoil is compost. You need to regularly add compost because it breaks down in the soil. Compost used as a mulch will suppress weed germination. Compost will increase the numbers of earthworms in the soil, which is beneficial for soil health.